Dan Andrews. Where are we looking? Dan Andrews. Here we go. Um, he was the Premier in Victoria during COVID and a bit after and everything else. He had issues that he sort of hand waved away to do with branch stacking and a few other bits and pieces. But he's always seemed to skate his way out of things. By the end of it, I think even his most ardent supporters were starting to turn against him. The unions were certainly no fan of him by the end. He attracted the moniker Dictator Dan for what he did through COVID and even before that. He attempted to sign Victoria onto China's Belt and Road Initiative by himself when it was probably, well, when it is something that was being handled at the federal level, and Australia, I'm pretty sure, wasn't signing on. And so he was seen as usurping his authority as a state level premier to engage in foreign affairs. Um, People also referred to Victoria at the time as the Democratic People's Republic of Victoria. And yeah, certainly the protests and the lockdowns and everything else that surrounded COVID, I I don't think it's left people necessarily with a good aftertaste. And now most people are willing to let bygones be bygones, and no one knew what they were doing at the time. So when he eventually resigned, left office, people were like, "Yep, okay, see you later. Don't come back." The military parade in Beijing over the weekend, so over the last few days, has it attracted news interest from around the world for who attended in terms of world leaders, and the perceived behaviour of those world leaders. If you'd seen do we have the picture? Yes, the picture of the world leaders right there on the back right. Okay, you can't see the cursor very well, but is Dan Andrews, not an active politician anymore. Now, it was uh, not a surprise for some people. Well, people who'd never liked him in the first place. Not a surprise that he shows up in the middle of a Chinese military parade and wheedles his way into appearing with world leaders as that. Yeah, people who never liked him had basically always assumed he was too big for his boots and had closer ties to China, or trying to maintain closer ties to China than he really should have. But the people who voted him didn't really care about that. Fine. It's a bit like Kevin Rudd. When he was voted in as Prime Minister, the links between him and China were kind of just like people went, yep, cool, whatever. They were known, and people kind of went, yeah, all right, that's a possible influence here based on personal relationships that they have with other people or the history of people that are close to them. But people have accepted that as part of the overall package. The counter argument when Dan Andrews was in power was, oh no, he's not doing that. No, he's not like that. Generally by media and groups more ideologically aligned with Dan Andrews. And they were always like, why call him Dictator Dan? That's not right. That's not nice. It's a bit hard to counter that argument when he shows up like this. And as it says there, even some of his even the most ardent supporters are left trying to justify why he showed up and did what he did. And, well, triple election winning Labor luminary, okay, it's coming from the ABC. He's going to give them a pass anyway. But the allegations or the investigation into branch stacking certainly I think was a big factor in his eventual departure from Victorian politics. Now, for the people who don't know what branch stacking is, when Australians vote, they vote based on an electorate, and you vote for your local member. Your local member generally represents one of the two major parties, maybe one of the fringe parties, depending on which party it is. They may be ideologically aligned with other parties. They may be actually coalitioned up or in an agreement with other parties to share power, all that sort of stuff. Or they may just say, look, we know we're never going to get into power, but if you vote for us, we're going to then pass your vote on to one of these other parties, preferencing. How you get members, or how you get prospective members, how you get people on the ballot in the first place, well, your political parties have to have their own vote and nominate someone. So the local branch of the party will have a meeting, have a caucus, have a backroom, whatever, and they'll have a vote or a series of votes to then select a candidate to then run in the local election. Branch stacking is where you move people between electorates so that when these internal party votes take place, you've already stacked it. You've basically guaranteed, if not completely guaranteed the outcome, you've weighted it in your favour because you've forced in a whole group of people who are ideologically aligned, or you've ensured sufficient union representation. Now, each of the major parties has their own internal divisions and power splits and things like this. So, for example, even within a party that's seen as progressive like Labor, there are more right-wing elements. There are elements that are probably more conservative. There are also elements that are far more progressive. And similar sorts of things in the Liberal Party, in the Conservative parties, that there are voices and factions, that's the word they tend to use, that have a different ideological slant to the official party line. Now, as these factions grow or shrink in dominance or make agreements with other factions, you can see the ideological slant or direction of the party overall change as these factions have power or not have power. And so when you see these power brokers take center stage, they're people who are either good at negotiating the different factions to a common agreement or enough to carry a desired candidate to the forefront. So by the time you, as a voting member of the public, go to put your ballot in the ballot box on election day, the candidates from the major parties have already been through several rounds of pre-selection and pre-selection basically of voting, and have pretty much come out with a fairly clear ideological position based on the faction they represent or the power faction at the time. So branch stacking is moving enough faction members around the place in the different electorates to ensure that the desired candidate rises to the top of the pile and then makes it onto the ballot. And there's no guarantee you're going to make it into Parliament or anything like that. In safer seats, it might be more of a guarantee, but the last couple of elections have shown that even very safe seats on both sides of Parliament are not. And so it actually forcing local members to do their jobs and represent their local electorate. Good thing. But that's what pre-selection, that's what branch stacking is. And it's a bit like, not gerrymandering in a way, but it's by forcing through the candidates you want to, especially in the safer seats. It means that you know when the members arrive in Parliament, whether you're in government or opposition, you know that you have a faction, a strong faction of whatever ideological slant within the party you want, there and present in the chamber. And so you can then push forward with policies that that faction really, really want. So it might only be a splinter section of the overall party. And so, yeah, you're not necessarily seeing the Labor Party altogether. You're seeing the representative interest of one small section. So things like back in the day when Bob Hawke introduced Medicare, for example. Yep, wonderful, wonderful system that was brought in and subsequent, but that was based effectively on a couple of factions within the Australian Labor Party pushing that. And obviously there was a bit of horse trading. Look, we'll back this if you back that, that sort of thing. Yeah, it's politics on in a microcosm that plays out as well on a macrocosm. And I guess if you want to see where the big ideological shifts happen or the big directional shifts happen, you look down inside the parties at these factions and see who has power. So when they hold caucuses, or I forget what the Liberals call their things, but basically they can, when they do their party leader, elect their party leaders and stuff in Parliament, or even the head of the party as in general, it's driven by factions. It's not so much driven by, oh, you might be the best person in the end of the day. Well, it's driven by which factions have the most power. And so over time, various factions gain and lose power, and people will pander to certain things in order to attract enough of a power base to carry power. That sort of thing. So yeah, Dan Andrews was getting investigated, or was being associated with the branch stacking that had been going on at the time, and people see it as being a grossly unfair practice, because the assumption is the person who's arrived on the candidate as a candidate on the ballot deserve to be there by virtue of them basically wanting to represent the local electorate's interests and being elected fairly by the members of the party. Well, if you've stacked the branch, it's not a fair vote, and so the everyday party members, who are the ones who nominally vote a candidate forward, their voices don't carry the day, and so yeah, it's seen as a corrupt practice or an unfair practice. I mean, depending on how much you look down on the practice, you would be whether you see it as just unfair, corrupt, or a way of doing business. Yeah. So the link Dan Andrews had with China, or tried to form with China, I think were fairly well known, and it just determined as to which media you read, or which who you spoke to or listened to, as to how much of an influence or how much of an impact that actually had on his ability to conduct his role as Premier. And it was certainly one of the things he pushed when he was in power, and the idea that he went and did China visits, official China visits, without telling people what was going on, or the fact that the federal government said don't sign up to Belt and Road, but he did anyway. And basically he ignored criticism. He's like, oh, I'm in power, get over it. Legacy tarnished. Well, I think it's more so people who were his supporters now seeing him for what he was, or what he is. I don't think that's cynical. I don't think that's an unrealistic approach. But not a great look for that. And the fact that the media's coming out to... Why did that not load properly? Okay. Yeah. Tone deaf. I mean, the reason for the parade and whatever else to commemorate the end of World War II, not a problem. But the fact Helen Clark wasn't too bad. But yeah, there's some interesting names there. Plus the focus being on North Korea and Russia and everything else. Yeah, it's yeah, uh, doesn't go well.